It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life. From the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators. The famous and not so famous. The controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here is Douglas Coleman.
Howdy ho there. Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. How are you? Hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. I know I did. Peter Abrams is here today. Peter is a young man who has accomplished an awful lot in his 20 years of life. He is an award-winning comedian, musician, author, speaker, and entrepreneur. Kind of amazing he's had so little time to do so much. It's a full show interview, so we don't have a lot of time to chit-chat. We will be right back with Peter Abrams.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Hi there, this is Stuart Epps, record producer. This is my story about Elton John, working with him in those early years, going back to 1967 at Dick James, all the amazing tours, those first recordings, going through to Rocket Records, and it's an amazing story about his incredible rise to stardom and my part in that. So look forward to taking you on that journey. So here we go. Yeah, and to order this great audio CD, please just email me at stuartepps@talk21.com. That's Stuart, S-T-U-A-R-T, Epps, E-P-P-S, at talk, T-A-L-K, 21 in figures.com. Stuart Epps at talk21.com. Email me and I'll give you all the details for buying this brilliant audio disc. Thank you, bye.
Tired of living in a culture of lies, fake news, and alternative facts? The Pro-Truth Pledge reverses the tide of lies by calling on politicians, and everyone else, to commit to truth-oriented behaviors. The pledge asks signees to commit to 12 behaviors that research in behavioral science shows lead to truthfulness, such as clarifying one's opinions and the facts, citing one's sources, and celebrating people who update their beliefs toward the truth. Private citizens who sign the pledge get the benefit of contributing to a more truth-oriented society. Public figures get more substantive rewards for signing the pledge in the form of positive media and public recognition. The pledge crowdsources the truth by asking volunteers to evaluate the statements of public figures who sign the pledge. Take the pledge, demand that your elected representatives do so, and encourage your friends to take it at protruthpledge.org.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Peter Abrams. Hi, Peter. How are you?
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm very well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. I was intrigued by your bio when you sent it to us a couple months ago, I'd say. And I was impressed that for 19 years old, you've done an awful lot of stuff. And I've got your...
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm 20 now, but...
Oh, you're well, geez.
Just turned 20, but you know, as I'm growing into old age, it's starting to catch up with me, yeah.
So I'd like to just take each piece one at a time, if you don't mind, and you can tell us about those parts of your life. So
sure.
Let us start with comedian.
Yes, weird one, right? Who would want to do that? It's actually funny you brought it up first. Comedy is probably the last thing that I got into. And it was actually a result of the things I'd done subsequently, me realising that if I wanted to try and say something seriously, I needed to find a way which would have me taken seriously. So ironically, I turned to comedy because I found in sort of how people receive information that it was the best way to talk to people and get something across to them.
So your comedic routine is... Why don't you give us an example or just explain what it is? Because you said getting something across. Is it political or is it social or what is it?
Well, it's my comedy kind of material comes from my experience of being a young person who was fortunate enough to have some cool experiences and meet some amazing people. and kind of grow up into this world, realizing that it's a little bit crazy and a little bit weird. And a lot of my comedy material is about people my age sort of questioning society, saying, are things really how they should be, and the weird sort of concepts that come with that.
Well, I think every generation sort of goes through their rebellious period in questioning authority and questioning the government. And certainly when I grew up, I hate to say how much older I am than you.
Don't tell, as long as it's not triple, we'll be all right. I think that's manageable.
Well, let's see, 24... no, not quite triple. Not quite.
Good, we're all right.
Not quite. But, yeah, and, even like people that were older brothers and sisters of my friends in the 60s, they had all of the Vietnam War to protest, and it was a big, huge divide in the country. Similarly to what's going on now, it seems, in America. I don't know, Britain is... We can get into that a little bit later with Brexit and all that.
Yeah,
if you like.
Sure.
The one name that was on here was Russell Brand. And
yeah, that name's followed me like the plague.
How did you get involved with him?
So it was a really weird one, and I don't think you mind me saying, but at the time I didn't really know who he was, which I guess isn't what any sort of famous person wants to hear. But it all came from me working with a bunch of people at a recovery cafe. So it's just a cafe, but the people who worked there were people in recovery from whatever sort of thing they'd done. And I just started out sort of helping there. And it turned out in the end that he actually owned the cafe. It was a project he'd set up around the True Era movement, which is what he kind of started. And so I was just sort of at the cafe, and I went along to the celebration, and it was just amazing. First of all, meeting him and kind of realising who he was, the guy with the long hair who was a bit nuts on TV, to sitting down, and like you said, he was quite surprised about what I had done for my age and the sort of conversation I wanted to have. So we had those conversations, and from there, life kind of went a bit crazy. Obviously, within entertainment, if you can drop a name like his, it opens doors for you, and he's an amazing person and helped me massively break into the kind of things I'm getting up to now.
Well, the only reason I actually know who he is because he was on a show, Joe Rogan. Do you know Joe Rogan?
Yes,
yeah.
I'm a big Joe Rogan fan, yeah.
Yeah, and he was on that show, and I happened to see him, and so then it stuck when I saw your bio with his name come up again, so it was twice.
It was the same one.
Yeah.
Right, okay. That's interesting. Yeah, I love Joe Rogan. I think he talks a lot of sense in a lot of areas.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm a big Joe Rogan fan as well. Okay, so that's comedy. I want to get back to comedy, but let's go through all of the other bits, and then we'll go back to comedy.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's probably what better, yeah.
Okay, so musician is the next one. Tell us about your musicianship.
Okay, well, that one's quite, again, funny that we jumped to that one next, because when I was doing comedy, a lot of it was musical comedy. Take your sort of Bo Burnham as an example, stateside, that sort of material. And again, it was fantastic. I loved it. But as much as I was enjoying it, there was also something a bit more serious that I wanted to say. And obviously within comedy, you're constricted to trying to get a laugh at the end of the day. You can do whatever you want to do, but you need to make people laugh, otherwise it's not going to get you very far. So my brother's been a drummer for years, and we're so close, so we just decided, you know what, luckily, because I'd met enough people within entertainment over here through comedy, I decided, yeah, let's give music a go as well, why not, and complete the trio. So we've started that. We're just recording our first music now, and hopefully next year, with, the opportunities we've been given, /promised, depending on whether they fall through or not, hopefully that'll be a good avenue as well.
So it's comedy music?
Yeah, a lot of my comedy stuff is music based, like comedy songs or.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That sort of. Bo Burnham, if you know who he is, he's a really funny guy, and he's a really clever guy as well. It's kind of similar along those lines.
Okay. No, I don't know who he is, but I'll look him up.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so the next one is author.
Yes, that was the first one. That's the easiest one. So that one, I guess I'll just explain quickly by saying it kind of started as I started, helping out at the calf. I was a weird kid growing up. I always say, a lot of my friends were thinking first boyfriends, first girlfriends at like 13, 14, and I was sitting there thinking, what's the meaning of life? Is there a God? What happens after death? It was a bit of a weird headspace to be in, and obviously at that age, everything else going on, you think you're on your own, and that it's all really sort of crazy. So as I sort of got a bit older, you're talking like 16, 17 now, I just started jotting things down on my notes page on my iPhone, and then as life kind of carried on, and I had the experiences and met the people I'd ended up meeting, I ended up showing a few people who were authors some of the notes I had put down, and they said, you could turn that into a book. And I kind of laughed and said, there's no way. I mean, it's never been my intention. And then a year later, a book came out. So it was a pretty crazy experience, not something I'd ever have put myself down to do, but actually something now I love and something which I really want to continue.
What is your book called? So
the first one's called Our Story Called Life, which is a very bloody grand title and a bit prestigious, but basically it's talking about how we construct a perception of reality based off our experiences and, biases through our upbringing or whatever. And also looking at the common themes that despite our differences we all share, because thanks to the people I met, I was fortunate enough to meet an array of people from silent monks, who were quite difficult to interview, to ex-neo-Nazis, and I spoke to all of them, and it was interesting to find similar threads on what they were saying about their beliefs on life, which amazed me, and I thought I should probably write that down. And I did, and people read it, and I had a good response. And then from then, I've just put out a second one called Anti-Self-Help, which is kind of a year and a half later of being in the well-being industry over here in the UK, questioning is it actually what it's made out to be, or is it kind of just the same as every other industry is,
Anti-what?
Anti-self-help.
I like that.
It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but...
Anti-self-help, all right. Let's see, what else we got? A speaker, okay, that's kind of... It goes in with comedy.
I go to events and try not to be as funny as if I'm doing a comedy show, but the content's pretty similar.
Well, okay, then that brings up a point. What would be the difference if you went to speak? What would you speak about, rather than just doing a comedy routine? Again,
so it actually started with me speaking, and I was kind of at these sort of well-being events in London and stuff, talking about the book, talking about the things I'd learnt, and the things people had said to me, and it's a lot more, I mean, hopefully it's still enjoyable and funny, but I'm not playing to get a laugh, and I leave some of the ruder jokes out, I'd guess, compared to if I was on a comedy stage. It's just a different atmosphere and a different kind of audience, Comedy, if you go to a comedy show, you've got people who want to laugh. You go to a well-being industry show, you've got people who sort of want some sort of serious answer because they're paying a lot of money to be there.
When you say well-being, it brings up mental image pictures for me of like California and, sort of hippie cultish. We are all one.
A lot of that vibe.
Yeah.
When I told my mum that I was getting into all of this, she genuinely thought I was joining a cult, which took a conversation to explain it wasn't quite that. But actually, sort of contradicting myself, the more I got into these events, the more I went along to them, the more I found actually there is this sort of underlying blueprint in place which doesn't really want people to get better. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the whole thing's this sort of weird conspiracy, because of course there's people within that want to do good. But a lot of the time, I personally don't think the people who are saying, come on my retreat for $3,000 and I'll make your life 20 times better are legit. I don't think somebody can do that. I've always gone off of the idea that an individual has the answers they need, which is quite ironic, I say, but buy my book. But I try and do it in a bit of a funny way,
Well, you bring up a good point, because a lot of those people have been proven to be charlatans and just out to take people's money, and they manifest themselves in all sorts of forms, from the preachers and the preachers and the snake charmers to the like the hippie sort of guru types, and even if you study history, you go back to the Beatles when they hooked up with the Maharishi, and then he turned out to be a fraud. He was just, hitting on all the girls in their entourage. So it, I don't know. Sometimes I think you're right. I think people have the answer within themselves, but a lot of times people just can't find it.
Yeah, and I also think that, even if you don't have the answer right now, you don't need to go and spend the ridiculous amounts of money you do and start doing yoga every day, even though you don't really enjoy it, and have some weird crystal by the side of your bed to warrant you finding that. I think that, and look, this might sound obvious to some listeners or to yourself, but trust me, from someone who's done it for a year, there's a lot of people who will buy into this stuff, and like you said, it's always been a thing. Guru's the most fashionable way of selling it at the minute, but there's also this weird offshoot of people who aren't deliberately pulling the wool over people's eyes, because they're not con men per se, because they believe what they're saying as well. It's just what they're saying is sort of regurgitated nonsense, and it puts a band-aid over the issue. It doesn't actually address it, which is why I've personally always felt more comfortable doing a comedy show or doing a music show, because you're on that level of entertainer, of connecting with people through their level of pain or laughter or whatever it is. Whereas if I've always felt a bit uncomfortable standing on a stage going, hey, look at me, I've got the answers. To me, it kind of goes against what I think of. Actually, most people can or will find their answers, given enough, stability in life.
Well, I think that's a good point. Also, when you do a comedy show, assuming you're funny, people will
Exactly.
people will leave feeling better than probably when they came in. And anytime you have a good laugh, you always feel better. So
That's a great point.
Yeah, so I think there's some truth to that. And if you help, because that's the point, really, isn't it? For all of these gurus and stuff, that they want to make people feel better, so they don't scream over the 3,000 pounds or whatever that they just gave them. So yeah, I understand that. That's a very good point. The last one is entrepreneur, and have you got a particular business other than speaking? You selling some kind of product or something? Your books, perhaps?
Well, I mean, hopefully the books are selling. Blimey, I'll be in trouble if not. So it's obviously the books, it's the speaking, but actually what I did with the sort of profit I made from the first book is I set up a business over here which goes into schools and teaches creative writing. It teaches, basic meditation. It teaches sports. It teaches creative filmmaking, and a whole wide array of things, because for me, my big passion is working with young people. I think that's the future. I think that's exciting, and that, they're not formed yet. They still want to be astronauts or the president or whatever they want to be. They've still got those great dreams, and it's, for me, a beautiful balance to go from one, the night before doing a comedy show to the next day working with a bunch of 10-year-olds screaming and going nuts. To me, it's a really nice sort of balance personally for my life.
Well, at that age, you could probably, I'm trying to do this delicately, because at your age, you're not that much older than they are.
Yes, no, exactly. That's exactly why it works, because the kids look at me and go, hey, that guy doesn't look as old as everybody else who comes and speaks to us.
Right.
So it kind of gives me a great little way in to actually get them on my side and hear what I have to say. Because like you say, I was that kid 4 years ago. I was the kid who'd sit down in assembly and want to, throw little paper mache things at the person speaking because they were boring and drivel on. But so far I've found, because of that, I've been able to connect to them and hopefully give them something they can use.
All right, let's go back to comedy, because I think it's sort of serious right now. There's a film out there. I don't know if you've seen it. I interviewed the writer-director. I watched the film. It's on Amazon Prime Video. It's on all the streaming. It's good. It's a documentary if you ever get a chance to see it. It's called Can We Take a Joke?
Can We Take a Joke? Okay.
And it sort of narrates the political climate and the comedic climate in America, where the PC police, the politically correct police, have essentially stifled most comedy because they find it offensive on one level or another. You know,
it's weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
All of this. It's definitely happening over here as well. There was a moment, actually, very, very in recent memory. Did you hear about the Grenfell Tower accident that happened over here with the flat?
No. Oh, the one where the big fire.
Yeah, it was a big fire on this block of flats in London
Yes,
that hadn't had its proper security.
Yeah.
And basically, over Halloween, a bunch of people created sort of like an effigy of the tower, and were being, really racist and everything towards the victims of it, and it gave this huge backlash. And that's kind of at one end of the spectrum. And then there was literally a comedy gig I went to the other night, and because somebody mispronounced somebody's gender, the person kicked off, and the guy in the store actually had a go at the comedian, which is like right at the other end of the spectrum. And it's really sort of prominent at the minute, especially over here at least, and I feel like it's probably the same in America, of this sort of context has sort of disappeared, and it's kind of like everything now has to be sort of approved before you speak of it, and it's a bit crazy.
Yeah, it all has to be sanitized. And then even at that point, you don't know what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. If it gets so ridiculous, you won't be able to say anything at all.
Well, it makes comedy bloody hard.
It certainly does.
It kind of makes you double think when you're writing jokes, or when you're on stage. You think, wait, am I going to get in trouble for saying this? Which to me should never be the deal in comedy. Comedy is like, the medium beyond any others, which should be the space where you can explore these ideas and explore these concepts. But there's a real good guy whose name I can't actually remember, who said that, instead of wondering why are you saying that, you should be questioning why is it offending me, and maybe shift the focus from everybody else outside inside to why does this bother me. And I quite like that, but whether that would, whether people would apply that is a different question.
Well, the interesting thing about it is that in this film, the majority of the comedians said that their worst audiences, which used to be their best audiences, were at college campuses, universities.
Okay, that's really interesting.
And so it sort of led people to a political dialogue about how the radicals have taken over the universities and are teaching complete intolerance to the kids. And therefore, they made I don't know if you know who Lenny Bruce is. Do you know who Lenny Bruce is, or was?
No.
He was a comedian back in the late 1950s, early 1960s.
Sure.
Who was arrested multiple times for obscenity clauses that are no longer, illegal now. But what he says now, or what he said then, would be pretty tame for what's out there now.
Oh.
But back then it was pretty outrageous, and he got arrested several times, and he went to court, and he was fighting for his freedom of speech, or in America it's the First Amendment of our Constitution. And so, he was a political figure as well as a comedian. And sort of the comparison in this film is that Lenny Bruce, his best audiences at that time were the university students, because they were the anti-social rebels, anti-establishment, anti-government people, of the time, the 20-year-olds. Now, those same kids, this generation, would probably disapprove of him completely.
Well, this is the weird thing. It's also, I could say I can vouch for that a little bit too, because it is usually the younger people who are getting offended by this stuff. And whether it's right or wrong, you could talk on for hours. But my girlfriend's grandma said a really interesting thing the other day, and it's just come to my mind. She said, this is a bit gross and a bit grotesque, but she said, you know, my father during the war would go and pick up dead bodies of people and just said, well, we've got to get on with it. That's what we do. And, you know, that was their attitude. They were doing the most horrific things and going, well, you know, it's just what life is. Where now we're in this space where people sort of my age hear the wrong thing through their ear holes and go, God, this is the worst thing ever. And you just think, well, you know, maybe we're very lucky that we live in the time we do live in. And the fact that it takes such little petty things to offend us shows what kind of luxury we have. But I don't know, is it a human thing to just always need conflict, to always have to have an enemy? I don't know. I'm still trying to work that one out. But something I do believe is that at the end of the day, there's much bigger things and bigger issues we can spend our time worrying about than, you know, vows or words which we're hearing.
Gender.
I think it just seems a bit ludicrous.
Gender non-specific pronouns. Yeah.
Well, yeah, like, what's that all about? That's an interesting one.
That one just...
But isn't it contradictory that it's like, I have to be called this, but at the end of the day, beyond all of that, we're all human. And, like, to me, that sort of deeper level, you know, the larger perspective, that's always been the level I'd like everybody to work on. Moving past those sort of intricate details to actually the main points of what we're doing.
Well, once you get to this, see, this is the whole theory behind the globalization of the world and socialism, if you will, if you want to use those terms, where, first of all, you have to eradicate the differences between people. And it gets to be a bit like sci-fi movies where everyone is just that sort of unified look. There isn't any differences in people based on their race or their gender. Everybody is just sort of this neutral thing, and they usually have a number, you know, and they're identified by your number 5672A or something like that. I mean, I know that's a far-fetched thing, but it's the beginnings of that when you start to see the mindset of these people. Well,
it's interesting because it is the start. Yeah. You know, somebody once said you don't go from America's Got Talent to Hunger Games overnight. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a transition, and I do think that, you know, the path or the course of wherever we're going to go, obviously. But I'm with you on that one. I think when we can see these things happening here and now, this is the moment where we put in a change. This is the moment where we sit down and say, let's have the conversation. But again, we live in this kind of space, especially my generation at the minute, where it's because of online, because of technology, it's I'm going to create my world opinion and I'm just going to filter out the stuff I don't want to know. And that's so dangerous because I think it's so important to hear the whole argument, you know?
Right. And my attitude towards that, I've done a lot of reading and research when I was in school and a university about socialism, because even back when I went, they started to have very radical professors on the campuses. And, you know, so we learned it. And I was happy to learn it because I thought anything that I learn is a good thing, even if I don't agree with it. And what was interesting about it then, and I still think it's valid now, is that we as a world, as a human race, are not ready to all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. We're just we're not there yet, okay? Maybe in 200 years, maybe in 100 years, you know, the Star Trek moment, if you will.
Yeah.
But we're not there yet. Not when you have differences of, you know, the religious conflicts that are going on in the Middle East is a perfect example. And then you've got this imbalance in the European Union where the idea was to create that little kumbaya moment amongst the European countries. The problem was it was economics that didn't work and isn't working.
Yeah.
Where you've got the very rich country like the UK and Germany basically holding up the rest of them. And one by one, they're they're leaving, which is a great segue to Brexit because I wanted to get to that. And so Brexit, the people in the UK voted. It was close, but they voted they wanted out for a number of reasons. I know immigration was definitely one of them, but I think also economic. Now you've got Poland that's screaming about it. Italy is probably going to go as well. So I think it's a failed experiment. I think, they tried. They had this concept of this whole new world order, globalization, but it just didn't work because in the end, people are still bound to their nationalities. Well, I'm a Brit. Well, I'm an Italian. I'm a Pole.
Yeah.
And we haven't got over that yet. Until we break all that down and have a common think that can sort of weave our social fabric together, then you might be able to do something like that. But
what we really need is the Klingons to come down and invade, because that would be the perfect time for us all to group together.
Oh yeah, we would stop.
And it would take something like that.
Yeah,
but going back to Brexit, it was interesting to see it kind of unfold, because I think what happened with Brexit here was very similar to what happened with Trump over your side. People are so disenfranchised with politics now. People are so disenfranchised with the system. I don't think anybody in my generation looks at the people at a podium and go, oh, well, they're speaking truth. They're going to follow through in what they're saying. None of us believe it. None of us are engaged because none of us believe what we're hearing is authentic or real. It's like we're in on the joke that it's a reality spectacle put on. And I think a lot of, the UK kind of gets defined as London and then the other bits. But as soon as you leave London and go north, you really see a lot of people aren't living a very good quality of life. I mean, granted, it's not as bad as, a lot of other places in the world. But they're so disengaged. They have no sort of spiritual life. They have no sort of religious belief. They're just sort of existing in this space. And I think when it came to voting for Brexit, a lot of people here in the UK looked and went, do you know what? I'm so fed up that I'm just going to go to leave. Nobody really understood it. And a lot of people now, it's funny, but a lot of people want a second referendum. A lot of people want there to be a second vote because a lot of people believe that the information wasn't put out clearly. But, my belief was the information's never put out clearly. And I think what we're seeing a lot in politics across the globe is people coming to this point of, actually, I'm fed up with how it's been because we just know it's crap now. We're not going to buy into it anymore, so I'm just going to go for the opposite one.
So it brings up the question then, and I know that this has been going on, and Prime Minister May has been trying to get a deal with Brussels to make a clean break, but they're having all sorts of trouble. So my question is then, what did the people in Britain expect to happen when they voted for Brexit?
Well, I think people expected to have the opportunity to take power back into their own hands. I think a lot of people here saw it as this idea that it didn't really matter who was in charge of our government because they were still being ruled by European overlords. And, I mean, I don't think it's like some sort of weird conspiracy, but at the same time, you've only got to watch a thing called the Eurovision Song Contest to see it is kind of political games and buddies with who's buddies. And it's just a weird one. I think a lot of people here thought that if they left the EU, then at least the person in charge here could be held accountable. But I don't think a lot of people were informed or educated on what was happening anyway. And I think we're going to see the repercussions because of that.
So you think that Brexit in the end will be a bad deal for the UK?
I don't know. I think initially it will be different, which will feel negative because it's a change and everybody hates change. But it's in our hands. This is what I get frustrated about when talking to people here, because a lot of people go, oh, we need to get a second vote. And it goes, the vote's happened. It goes back to this idea of, I don't agree with it, so I'm going to throw my toys out the pram, which is kind of like the favoured action taken now. To me, it's happened. What we need to do is group together as communities on a local level and say, okay, how do we navigate these waters now? Because it's a new ocean, and we're going to have to sort of sail it whether we like it or not. By delaying it, by trying to get this second vote or whatever, we're just wasting the time that we have trying to get something back which is kind of already sailed, you know? If a second vote, did happen, then everybody who voted the first time could go, hold on, we need a third vote, because that's not fair on us. You know, and then, but it's just mental. But I mean, I wouldn't put it past what's going on at the minute. I wouldn't put it past Kanye West being your next president. Who knows?
Anything is possible. When Trump won, he broke all the molds and broke all the rules, and anything is possible.
Do you not think that was a sign of people's being so disenfranchised with the setup?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
I don't think any sort of sane human looks at him and goes, "Yeah, leader of a free world. That seems like a good idea." But at the same time, I don't blame a lot of people, because he spoke so unfiltered.
Yes.
You know, nobody's arguing he's an absolute idiot, but he's not faking it.
No.
That's the one thing. That's the one compliment I give him, is that he's not faking it. He is as ridiculous as he comes across.
He is genuine. He is genuine in what he says and what he tries to achieve. And, you know, he has achieved a certain level. The economy is roaring in America. And he's got his followers. He knows how to get people behind him.
But again, it goes back... Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, because like you said, with all the double-talking politicians, he cut right through all of that. He cut right through.
People.
And he hit a nerve with people that, like you said, were disenfranchised. They were just completely sick of it. They were sick of the, I promised to do this, and then they do totally the opposite. And then he was smart in the way that he played, because America is such a big country. You know, the way he took this state and took this state and took this state. He was very shrewd in the way he did it. He played the game right. So
yeah, it's interesting. You know, I spend quite a bit of time in America, and I love it. I wish I was. I'm quarter American, but I wish I was there permanently. And it's interesting because a lot of my friends there and a lot of the people I know there were so shocked when he did win the election. But to me, it was obvious. You know, you've only got to look at how the culture developed over the last 50 years. From an outside point of view, you'd go, actually, he embodies a lot of what the outside world sees of America.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Absolutely.
And I don't mean to offend in that sense, but a lot of people would look and go, well, you know, a clever businessman who takes opportunity and rises to the top is pretty much your sort of MO for the American dream. You think, okay,
yeah,
it's not that much of a surprise, really.
No, and actually, when he was running, everybody, this is a joke, this is a joke. And I kept saying, you know, because we have the two parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, and the Democratic side was Hillary, and that was it. There was nobody else except for Bernie, who almost took it from her. But anyways, there was about, I don't know, 400 on the Republican side. And then they just kind of dwindled down. And nobody stood out of that group except him. And at one point I said to my friends and to people, I said, you know what? If anybody can beat her, it'll be him. And they all laughed at me. Him? This is a joke, you know? Yeah. And I sort of knew it. I felt like, he's gonna do it. And right to the very end, all of the quote unquote, you know, polls were saying, oh, Hillary's up by 3, she's gonna win, blah, 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 blah. Every single news agency, save for the LA Times. The LA Times was the only one who always gave Trump a couple of point advantage.
Okay.
And
That's
so
really interesting, isn't it?
So basically, on the election night, the Democrats got hit upside the head with a plank, is what happened. All right?
Yeah.
And they've never recovered. They have yet to recover. And so now there's just this pissy animosity about anything he does. You know, he could hand everybody a check for $1 million and they would complain.
Well, this is my issue, because nobody is good or evil. This is the problem, I think, with a lot of people's mentality towards politics. They treat it like it's a video game. You know, it's like, I'm the good guy, you're the bad guy. And I love the quote that, you know, hate travels quickest, love takes a second, and understanding requires a step back. Because, you know, it's easy to look at somebody like Trump and demonize him and say, you know, he's evil, he's a lunatic, he's a madman. But he is the president of your country. It's the same here. It's easy to look at Theresa May and go, she's heartless, she's cold, she's clueless. But yet she is in charge. And to understand why gives you an opportunity to learn and grow and move forward in any aspect of life, I think. So to just sort of go, oh, you know, capitalism's awful, the world's going mad, is very easy to say for people of my age sitting on their brand new sofa with their iPhone. You know, it's like, It's such a contradiction. And actually, a lot of the time, what I've found is it's that middle path, that sort of balanced view that gives you an opportunity to actually understand what's going on. I mean, this might be incorrect, but I believe more people watch the Super Bowl than vote, or more people watched the Super Bowl and voted in the election. And, you know, that kind of says a lot about where people's attention is. Over here, more young people voted in the last sort of voting opportunity we had than they'd seen in 50, 60 years since the 60s or whenever. And to me, it shows that, you know, it always goes back to my big belief of, well, actually, instead of worrying about the outside world and how it's affecting you, why don't you think, why is it affecting me? What can I do? Focus what you can control.
How is your national health system, if you had to give it a rating from 1 to 10?
Well, I'd say conceptually 10. At the minute, in reality, about a 6. I mean, one of my friends literally had a terrible accident and went along to the NHS the other night, and it took her 8 hours to be given painkillers, and she was in agony. I'm talking like absolutely screaming in pain, like horrific. And you're going up to the nurses and going, you know, we're not, you know, she doesn't need to be seen. Can you just give us some sort of pain relief? And they're going, we've got 19 other patients we have to deal with. Can you just wait? And it's awful, but it's awful because the attention on budgets and everything is being put elsewhere. To me, the NHS is the embodiment of what works about the UK. I think it's an absolutely amazing thing to have, and they've saved, you know, countless of millions of lives of friends and family. And ask anybody from the UK, they will, I'd hope, say the NHS is one of our defining assets. But sadly, the people above them who decide what goes where have decided there's other things more important. And that kind of leads me to the point I wanted to make of the EU, the presidency, all these things are just systems. You know, technology, it's just a tool. It's like, go back to that saying we all learnt when we was 4, you are what you eat. These things are what we make them. And that seems to be kind of forgotten about. We sort of create this narrative of, oh, well, the president's evil and it's sort of this matrix system now. It's like, no, it's just a tool. But what can we all do on a local level, on an individual level? That's where I think the attention should be. And it goes the same for the NHS. What can we do as an individual, as a local community to support the NHS? How can we make a difference? But focus on what you can control. Otherwise, you're just daydreaming, you know? And that's when you do relive the 60s.
There was a comic strip that I saw, and it was pertaining to Canada. Canada has a very similar national health than in the UK. And it basically was, you know, 3 boxes, and then 3 boxes, and then 3 boxes. And then the top one said, you know, Canada's national health. Wait here, wait here, wait here. And they showed the queues, you know, everybody waiting in all these queues, right? And then on the bottom one, it said the U.S. health system, pay here, pay here, pay here. Okay. And so, I mean, this is the argument now because we've tried to implement some form of national health system, and we kind of have a hybrid thing where the very poor people can get the government assistance, but the people that are sort of working class have to pay, and the prices have just been going through the roof. But we don't have that. My point is that you said it took your friend 8 hours to get painkillers. This has been the argument from the people who are against having socialized medicine or national health in America, is that they said you create this enormous wait time for everyone.
Yeah, you do if it's not executed well. The problem is here, the NHS have no funding. All the nurses are exhausted because they don't get paid enough or enough breaks. You know, if the NHS was set up how it was meant to be set up, it would work better, if not fine. It would work much better than it currently does. But there's no budget, there's no funding. Going back into why people are fed up with politics. But I don't think it should be an idea which is totally discarded because other people haven't done it as well. You know, it's like you look at Russia and go, well, communism doesn't work. It doesn't mean it's a bad or good concept. It's just what one group of people did with that. But it doesn't mean it couldn't work for you. Maybe it wouldn't work for you, but that conversation needs to be had instead of just, oh, it will work, it won't work, back and forth for the rest of time.
Now, do you have, if you're wealthy in the UK, do you have the option of private insurance?
Yeah, for sure. And it's phenomenal. It really is. One of my good friends' parents worked in banking. They came down with a life-threatening injury, was seen straight away and made a full recovery. It's a phenomenal service, but I don't even want to think about how much money it costs. But then it goes back to that thing. I've got a canary, right, and it's got a weird sort of lump on its leg, and I won't take it to the vet because I'm thinking, bloody hell, it's going to be very expensive to fix a bird that is 12 years old. I don't even think canaries are meant to live that long. And my point being is I'm looking at this canary thinking, blimey, money is determining whether this thing lives or dies. And I'm not, an outright animal activist, but I feel terrible because I'm like, I could save this bird's life, but I don't want to pay the bill. And then you think, okay, well, actually, that kind of mentality is applied a lot in our society. It's if you're rich enough, you can get the symptoms sorted out.
Yeah, so that's the foundations of the socialist thinking. And thinking, why is that fair? That the rich man can have all of that and I have to do. It all started with Marx back in the mid-1800s in London.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting for me to watch films like, Charles Dickens, or even there was the one in the 70s, Upstairs, Downstairs, on BBC, which, had the two families, the upper class upstairs and the servants downstairs. And it was real interesting that how they sort of integrated themselves as to being sort of one family.
And it's interesting how that affects people's level of happiness. Because, arguably, when you get told this is what you are, when you get told you're a servant, you don't question it. And your level of happiness actually could be relatively high. And it goes back to where my thought is kind of a lot at the minute of people struggle with absolute freedom. People struggle with choice. There's an unbelievable statistic where the times in history where least people commit suicide is when a world war is happening, right? And the time most people commit suicide is when it's relatively actually a stable functioning society, which is just the most backwards statistic you could ever imagine. You think it would be the opposite way around, but it's interesting to see that, I think, because it looks and goes, actually, what do people need to be content?
Yeah, I think you've brought up an excellent point, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why the people are revolting on the university campuses, because they've got it too good.
I think that's a big part of it, to be honest, and I'm kind of one of those, so I'm aware that I'm one of those. I live in absolute luxury. We all pretty much live in more luxury now than kings did 400 or 500 years ago.
Sure.
Of course we do. The thing we're kind of talking on, or what I'm speaking to you on, has more information on it than what they flew somebody to the moon, more technology than what they flew somebody to the moon. It's mental. But what do we do with that power? What do we do with that freedom? That's where the conversation interests me now, and where I want to take what I do forward is technology is advancing. We're losing belief in religion, spirituality globally. It's declining. So what do we do? Because, you know, the last time we kind of took control of our own surroundings and removed God from the picture, the greatest thing we achieved was the atomic bomb. So where do we go? How do we navigate this new power we have of actually being able to do whatever we want with our time? And that sort of time management, how we're spending our time, I think is the key bullet point to look at how we feel within our own lives.
Yes, I think technology is stealing one's soul.
Do you think that's a lot to do with social media or just the internet in general?
Well, it certainly stole the soul of the music, because so much of the music that's just created on a computer, it does nothing for me. But if I hear somebody sitting with an acoustic guitar in a little cafe singing his heart out, it touches me. It creates emotion. But techno music doesn't create any sort of emotion for me. It just leaves me cold. It's like listening to that soundtrack on the Nintendo game. Yeah, sort of plinky plonky. It just does nothing. So your question about one thing about having so much information right at your fingertips, I think it has created, well, it has diminished everyone's attention span.
For sure, yeah.
You know, people can't really sit and read an entire book like they used to in the old days by candlelight or whatever.
No,
you know,
not at all.
And I think just all of this bombardment of information, I think it's making people half crazy. And maybe it's creating sort of, to quote the Bible, idle hands are the devil's playground. And,
sure, yeah.
You know, maybe it's something like that where, you know, your brain might be going, but you're not really doing anything except sitting at a desk. And if you had to get up and go deliver newspapers or go milk the cow or something, it would give you an alternative to just sitting there thinking about how bad capitalism is, you know.
You know, I think so many people spend so much of their time doing something that doesn't ignite them, or if not absolutely inspire them, spending their time doing something that doesn't make them want to be depressed. I think so many people waste so much time doing things they just absolutely can't stand. And I'm fully aware, you know, not everybody can just walk out the door and go and get their dream job. I'm not saying that. But away from even just the job they're doing, they spend hours on social media just looking at other people's lives, and that iceberg effect of you then start judging yourself. All these things that we're all so aware of, and yet very few people actually do anything about. And we've never had to deal with this before. This is why I think we find it difficult. You know, there's not any lessons to be learned really from history about the internet yet, because my generation, you know, kids younger than me know how to use an iPad by 3 years old. That iPad is a part of reality for them always, and that's a whole new type of human that nobody really knows how they're going to turn out, because we've never had to navigate the waters. And I think in times like that, and I don't know because I'm not an expert, but I think we should try and spend our time doing things that make us feel alive, make us feel good, or if not, at least make us feel connected to what's going on. And to me, that's always been through being around other people, working with younger people. And I think everybody knows. Going back to our first point, it's why it annoys me about this sort of new age hippie movement going on, because there's this whole idea that there's a life to be had, when actually I think, well, what about the one you've got? Why don't you work on that one instead of chasing some sort of pipe dream, you know?
I think the worst bit for me, being at my age, is that in order to, I mean, I'm married, I've been married for a long time, so I'm not in the dating scene anymore. But for people that are single and they're looking for someone, that you have to go through an app first. I think that just sort of, I don't know, there's something wrong with that. And, you know, depending on how many emojis you use, will determine whether or not you get a date. That to me is just mind-boggling. I did want to tell you one quick little story, and then we've got to wrap because we've done an hour.
Wow, yeah.
I had a guy on. He was telling me about his film, and we were talking about technology a little bit, and he said, my 5-year-old son the other day was sitting at the window, and he kept flicking his hand like this at the window, and I thought he was swatting a fly or an insect or something, and I went up to him, and I said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm trying to swipe the screen.
Oh, my God.
So he was trying to change the view outside the window by just swiping at the window, right?
Wow.
So, I mean, this is where we've become. And then I guess Daddy had to explain to him that the window was not a touchpad. And the view could not be changed simply by swiping the window.
Let me come back at you then with a story of my own quickly. The other day I was working in a school, and there were 2 kids who were hugging each other and then would break apart and then hug each other again. And the teacher comes over to me and goes, what are they doing? And I said, I don't know. And us in our adult minds jumped into, is this inappropriate? Is this weird? And a few minutes later, we worked out that they were actually trying to work out how when they hugged, their 2 shadows would become one. And then they'd separate and they'd see their 2 shadows again. And they were trying to work it out. And I think that's a sort of beautiful contradiction to the genius child who's going to design transferable outside screens for Windows in the future.
Well, there's something real. There's something real about 2 people hugging each other. It's completely
lost.
Trying
to work out what their shadows were doing.
Yeah, I mean that's real play. That's like playing with a ball,
Yeah.
Rather than like you said, the window transferable view.
But how do you take that forward? I think again, to finish, it goes back to that balance. And in everything we do, and the things that really excite me that I digest, I look at the things and go, actually, it's taking the best of both. Technology is not a bad thing. We can cure diseases that would have killed billions, even not even a few years ago. We can do all of that now with technology, but it's just keeping the balance between how do we incorporate all these new amazing things that we're finding alongside with how do we manage our time, how do we spend our life focusing on what actually makes us feel connected and real, instead of looking out our window and thinking, yeah, I mean, the New York skyline's nice, but I'd prefer if I could swipe and it be Dubai.
I think we have to keep in mind that we created these computers. And that we control them. They do not control us. And once they start controlling us, then we're on the losing side.
For sure, but it can always change. That's what people miss. Change is just this constant thing that happens, and if it happens to affect your personal view of the world, you feel it more. But change happens every day. There's an amazing website which you and all the listeners should check out, and I can't actually remember what it's called, but it's basically like this huge page of the things going on in the world right now, and you're seeing the number of people being born, the number of people passing away, and you just look at it and you go, blimey, the picture you see when you look out your window is the tiniest fraction. We are a constant moving picture. And it's a real reminder to me that actually, with the time you do have, what can you do with it that makes you feel a bit better than you did yesterday?
Well, I think that's a good image to leave on. Absolutely.
Yeah. And not putting pressure on you if tomorrow isn't as good as today was, because tomorrow might not be, but then the day after that might be. It's just a change. Just move with the changes is the end point, I guess. Do you have a website you want to tell people about? Yeah, I can plug stuff. So It's just www.ourstorycalledlife.com, and on there it's just me posting stuff. I'm on all the social medias just as myself, Peter Abrams. And then obviously I'll be doing books and music and all the things that put the attention back on me in the near future.
All right, Peter. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Nice talking to you.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Well, that's about all the time we've got for the show today. I want to thank my special guest, Peter Abrams. This is Douglas Coleman saying, I'll see you when I see you.